Salad Club. So our recording's underway. We're ready to go. We hope you have a really good session and that you enjoy it and you take some useful tips from this morning. So it's the underpinning logic around using psychometrics in coaching. It's to provide an accurate and a valid measurement of some psychological characteristics. And then through this, to provide insight and information that's going to help our clients to develop. That might be around, for instance, helping our clients get insight into how they interact with others, how they cope with stress, how they are as a leader, for example. So typically a psychometric assessment will focus in on a particular topic or a particular issue. And that can be used as one technique within the broader coaching relationship. But for psychometrics to be useful, to be helpful, to be effective in coaching, there's lots of things we need to consider and that we'll talk about this morning. Okay, it's really important that the feedback is delivered in such a way that helps the client to accept it. It's really important that the assessment measures what it's purporting to measure, so that those insights can help our clients towards positive behavioural change, and that's in line with their goals as well. Okay, so let's have a look and let's start our conversation and see what we'll talk through this morning. Okay, so the lots we're going to cover. First of all, we'll just check in with what we mean by psychometrics. So there's some of you here that might be really, really familiar with them and use them a lot already. Some of you might be less so. So we'll just make sure we're all singing from the same hymn sheet to start off with. We look at why we might use them in coaching. We look at how can we help to ensure that we use them effectively and correctly. And we look briefly at who can use them and what to look for in a psychometric as well. Okay, I'm having a little joke with all of us here this morning by calling each of these pieces chapters. There's been lots of great books written on this topic, and each of the pieces we talk about this morning could potentially be a book in itself. But of course, we only have time to cover each of them briefly. But we'll do our best to get the key points out of the little pieces that we do cover. Okay. And we'll have time for each of you to talk as well. And we'll be using the chat as we go through the morning, and we'll have time for breakout rooms as well. When it comes for the breakout rooms, if anybody doesn't want to join or isn't in a position to join, depending on what's going on in the background for you, you can stay here in the main session. That's absolutely fine. Okay. Okay, so first up, what do we mean by psychometrics? Okay, so if people could pop into the chat there, what's your understanding, if any? Maybe you've no understanding at this stage, and that's absolutely fine as well. What's your understanding of the word psychometrics? Okay, we'll have a look at some definitions ourselves in a few minutes. Okay. And psychologists and psychometricians of different research orientations might have slightly different definitions around what a psychometric is, but there's some common threads among all of them that we'll have a look at. Okay, so personality, a tool for measuring personality or ability, something that can give us insights into strengths and preference styles. Yeah, assessment of preferences, repeatable and valid assessments. Yeah, to measure things like personality, EQ, IQ, scientific assessments. Yeah, preference assessments. Great. I can see there's some knowledge already from the audience this morning from those answers there. That's great to see. Okay, okay. Let's have a look at some of the definitions. Okay. So one of the first ones, and one of the earliest ones, is from Francis Galton, one of the earliest psychologists to focus on individual mental differences. Psychometry, it's hardly necessary to say. That piece makes me laugh. I think it says more about him than anything else. Psychometry means the art of imposing measurement and number upon operations of the mind. Okay, so we can see it's all about quantifying the workings of the mind, that prior to this, those workings of the mind would have been seen as unpredictable. Okay, is immeasurable. This definition differs from some of the others by describing psychometry as an art, but we let Galton away with that one because statistical analyses and methods were not so well developed in 1879 as they are today. Okay, but we're starting to see that focus on measurement. A more modern one from the APA. Psychometrics is the branch of psychology concerned with the quantification again and measurement again of mental attributes, behavior, performance, and the like, as well as with design, analysis, and improvement of the test and questionnaires. Okay, so I like this definition because of that inclusion on the research, on the continued development of psychometrics. And any of the more modern definitions we look at will emphasize the research and the scientific rigor that would differentiate a psychometric, let's say, from a quiz you might take in a magazine. Okay, anybody listening today of a certain age, as I am, might remember those quizzes of our teenage years in Just 17 and Sugar magazine and Smash Hits. Okay, so just so we're all clear that this is very different, that there's an academic and a scientific rigor and research behind the psychometrics that we're talking about this morning. Then the last definition from the Psychometric Coaching Institute. Psychometric tests are a standard and scientific method used to measure individuals' mental capabilities and behavioral style. This particular definition highlights something important about psychometrics, which is that generally all tests fall into two broad categories. Okay. So these categories, one will be measures of maximum performance. So these would be called tests of ability or aptitude or attainment. They're tests that have right or wrong answers. So and they're challenging you to do your best and to demonstrate what you're capable of. They're often timed, these assessments, and they often get progressively harder throughout the assessment as well. And these are the ones that will be most useful and most often used in selection and recruitment. Then we have another type, measures of typical performance. Okay, these are tests that don't have right or wrong answers, but they're questions that different people will answer in different ways. Okay, so often these assessments are a self-report or a self-measure, and they rely on people to answer the questions candidly, openly, honestly. And in this category, we're looking at assessments around interests, around motivation, around personality. Okay. So these assessments give us a prediction of how people are likely to behave, okay, and their personal preferences. So these are the ones that as coaches we'll be much more interested in, okay, because they can also be used for personal, professional development, team development, leadership development. Okay, and it's really nice, the coaching and development is a really nice space to use psychometrics in, because compared to selection, people tend to be much more honest and open with them. You know, there's not that feeling that they're being watched, they're being judged, that their results are going to determine whether they're successful in something or not. Okay, so it's these measures of typical performance. So as I say, we're talking about maybe personality assessments, interests, motivators, drivers, emotional intelligence, all of these type of things that we're really interested in as coaches. Now, why might we use them in coaching? Okay, I think many of us here this morning will understand that the pressures facing some of the people we're working with as coaches, particularly leaders and executives, that pressure can be relentless, and it leaves very little time for reflection, for headspace, and all of the good things that come with that. And that brings a great opportunity, I think, for us as coaches, but also a challenge in that how do we deliver results for people who are results driven, who are time poor, who are bright, and how do we maximize the value that we can bring for these people as coaches and for them as well as for their team and their organization as well. And within leadership and executive, particularly, there's been a growing awareness and understanding of developing leadership styles and behaviors, as well as the technical skills that people need in these roles. And with this has come an appetite to understand what drives those behaviors, okay, what motivates us to perform in a certain way, and how personality traits can come into play there as well. So this is where psychometrics, those psychological measurement tools we've just identified, can have a real contribution into our coaching relationship. Okay, so if we look in a little bit more detail. Okay, first of all, we're going to do a little activity here to get your minds going, your brains activated this morning in case they haven't been yet already. Okay, so you can see a series of numbers on this slide here. Okay, the numbers 1 to 54 are on this chart, and I'm going to challenge each of you individually to find each number in numerical order on the chart. So starting with 1, then 2, then 3, and so on, all the way up to 54 if you can. Okay, I'm going to show you 1, 2, and 3 now. So if you have a look in the very top left corner, you'll see number 1. Okay, and then if you look about, let's say, a third of the way down, in the middle, a little bit to the right is number 2. And then up in the top right corner, you'll see number 3. Okay, so I'm going to give you 45 seconds now, and I want each of you to do your best. See how far you can get from 1 to 54 in trying to find these numbers. Okay, off you go now. Okay, and stop. Okay, let's see how we're doing here. Anyone with you, if your camera's on, if you can turn your camera on, that'd be great. Can we have a show of hands? Who got up as far as, let's say, who got up as far as 10? We'll start off easily. Good few of you, well done. How about 20? Alan, you should have done better than that. You've seen this before. I'm disappointed. And what about 30? Anybody get up as far as 30? No, okay. Okay, well, we're going to give you a bit of a dig out. Okay, so what if we told you there was a framework behind this? Okay, which I'm showing you here. So in that, when you're trying to find these numbers, you follow this pattern. So you'd start in the top left to find number 1, the top center to find number 2, the top right to find number 3. Okay, if I show that pattern just overlaid on top of the numbers themselves, you might see. Okay, so we can see that there's a framework here. There's a structure behind what we're looking at. So that now that you're in on the secret, I'm going to give you another shot. Okay, I'm going to put the numbers up again. I'm going to give you another 45 seconds and we'll see how far you go this time. You ready? Off you go. Okay, time's up. How did we go that time? Let's say who got to 20 or further? Nice. And 30? Super. Anyone to 40? Phew, brilliant. Anyone to 50? Yeah, all the way to 54, Finton? Okay, but up to 50. Okay. Okay, well done. Okay. So what made the difference here was having that framework or that supporting structure on which to hang your approach. So I'm using this example to highlight the idea that if we know what we're looking for, it's easier to find. Okay, if we have a compass, it's easier to find our way. And that's something that psychometrics can give us as coaches. Okay, so often they're based on a theoretical model or a framework that enables us to have really effective conversations with our clients. Okay. So why might we use them? So something is that they give us data. Okay, they're giving us data and insight. Okay. in terms of giving us data to support the coaching conversation itself. They can reveal things to us that might not come from discussion alone with our coachee or with our client. Okay, particularly maybe where self-awareness is a little bit more limited with our client. Okay, they're giving us lots of information that we can use to have great conversations. Okay, and that's a really important part here, that the psychometrics are something that enable and facilitate the coaching conversation, not something that replace it. I mean, at this point, particularly, I think if we think of 360 assessments, okay, so for anybody who's not familiar, where you have an assessment that an individual will take, but also a set of people around them will take it on their behalf. So perhaps their manager, their peers, their direct reports, any other organizational stakeholders. Okay. These 360s can highlight blind spots for our coachees that ordinarily as coaches, we wouldn't have access to that. We would only have access to our client's perspective of themselves, of a situation, of their relationships, which arguably is the most important perspective. I appreciate that. But I think having that opportunity to be able to identify, to discuss, to develop those blind spots can be really, really powerful. I mean, with a 360, I think even somebody thinking about who they might like to complete the assessment on their behalf can be helpful. Okay, you know, even if somebody thinking about who are my stakeholders, whose feedback would I really value? And if somebody enthusiastically agrees to give feedback for an individual, that's great. And why might that be? You know, what is it about their relationship with them? And that means they're really willing to do so. Or equally, if somebody declined to give feedback, why might that be? So there's just so much potential for good questions and information to come out there. Okay. They can also provide insights to support our relationship with our coachee, okay, as well as that conversation. Okay, they can potentially be an additional tool to secure buy-in. If there are situations where potential coachees or potential clients are uncertain of the, let's say, the efficacy or the validity or the structured approach to coaching, they can be, for some of those people, they can be a tool that will help us as coaches to secure buy-in. They can also be a great way into tricky conversations or tricky topics, okay, because they're helping people to talk about things. They're giving them some information rather than our coachees having to start from scratch. Okay, and particularly, again, where coachees maybe lower self-awareness, maybe less comfortable talking about themselves, okay, they have that framework, or they have that thing to hang their conversation and their discussion on. So that's deeper insights data that it's giving us. It's also giving us a shared language and understanding, another really, really important reason. And that might be a language for our coachees or the individuals themselves, okay, that can help with their self-awareness and can help them express themselves better. Okay, and again, a lot of people can find it a lot easier to open up on certain topics and areas about themselves when they have that language there for them. And as well as the individuals and the coachees themselves, it gets a fantastic opportunity to provide a shared or a common understanding for teams and organizations. Okay, we've seen this work really, really effectively where we've worked with, let's say, entire leadership teams and entire departments that have taken the same psychometric. And then that language within the psychometric becomes part of their everyday vernacular. And it can really help to objectify things. You know, when you're talking about working relationships and teams, it can make it a little bit less personal. You know, it might be less, you know, it's Tanya's fault because she said this, or she didn't communicate that, or somebody else did this. Okay, it's a little bit less personal and more objective. And people can start talking about things like trust, like psychological safety, like delivery of results, okay, in a more commonly understood way. Okay, so again, that's just touching on it, but two really, really great reasons there why they can be so helpful for us to use in coaching. Okay. The next thing we need to do is to make sure how we use them effectively ourselves. Okay. And some potential pitfalls we can sometimes come across with psychometrics. Okay. One might be that the coachee can use the results as an excuse, if you like, or an explanation for their behaviors. Okay. Sometimes I've seen people become a little bit hooked almost, if you like, by their psychometric profiles. As we just talked about shared language, psychometrics have their own terminology. And that can be initially very appealing for people. Okay, but sometimes there's potential for it to become oversimplified, and a form of labeling that might be glossing over something that's much more complex. And sometimes it could put somebody in a box, okay, where their results or that label can become a self-fulfilling prophecy or an excuse to avoid change. So you might hear people say, for example, things like, oh, I'm a yellow, I don't do conflict, or I'm an ESTJ, I don't do feelings. Something like that. Okay. So we can overcome this by using assessments that focus on skills or behaviors rather than types. Okay, that's something that can be really, really helpful. And these are much more aligned with coaching, okay, which is really all about maximizing somebody's personal or professional potential rather than defining it or limiting it. Another thing I've seen happen is that coachees or people can become disappointed with the results. They might become angry even if they don't like the results that they're seeing. Okay, so we have a huge responsibility here to make sure that feedback is accurate and it's skillfully delivered, and that the results are put in their proper context and perspective for our coachees or our clients as well. This might be around the language that we use when we're describing scores. Okay, so let's say, for example, rather than telling somebody that they're below average in something, okay, or they haven't scored as high as everybody else, the language might be rather, this is a skill that you don't tend to use as much as other people, okay, or it's a skill where you have scope to develop further. So just being really mindful and conscious of our language around the scores. Okay. Any good psychometric as well, any really good one that's worth its salt, will have for us as coaches or practitioners, it will tell us how the person responded to the questions. So sometimes if somebody doesn't like the results, is questioning the results, they might say something like, gosh, that's not me. Where did that score come from? That doesn't sound like me at all. If you're using a really good psychometric, again, that has that access for you into how people answer the questions, as a coach, we'll be able to say, well, look, let's go and have a look at the questions and how they were answered to see where that score might be coming from. Okay. We can also remind our coachees as well that the results that are in a psychometric, particularly when it's a measure of typical performance that we identified. So if it's personality, if it's emotional intelligence, motivators, drivers, anything like that, the scores that are in the resulting report from the assessment, that's our client scores and it's their information. Okay, and the report is presenting it back to them in a certain way. But we can remind them of that, because sometimes with psychometrics, again, people might feel like you're telling me that I'm like this, but actually it's your information. Again, so let's have a look at how you answer the questions and we'll see where the scores may be coming from. That's really, really helpful and powerful there. Okay. Another watch point is that potentially any discussion around psychometric scores could dominate a coaching conversation if somebody allows it to. Okay, and that might be the coachee, or it might be you, the coach as well, getting drawn into a really detailed conversation around the scores. And while those scores are valuable, we don't want it to detract from the real focus of the conversation, which is the coaching work and the coaching relationship. Okay, so a couple of ways we can overcome this. One is even how we position psychometrics, even before any coachee sees their assessment report. Okay, so as we mentioned at the beginning, I'd always emphasize that psychometrics are there to support and facilitate the coaching conversation, not to conclude it. Okay, so maybe language around like this is the start of a journey or the start of an investigation. This isn't our destination or our diagnosis. It'd be helpful here to remind your coachee that psychometrics are only one source of data as well. Okay, so there's also what arises in discussion between them and you, the coach. There's also feedback from, let's say, their leader, their team. Okay. And the last thing that can be helpful here is if in any situation, if psychometric scores are starting to dominate the conversation, it's always to bring those scores back to our client's context and their situation, because that's what it's all about. Okay, so questions like, what does this mean for you and your performance? You know, what do these skills look like for you in everyday life? How does this impact how you interact with your team? Okay, or how do you ensure you actually use these skills? Any of those kind of questions. As I say, always bringing it back to our client's context and their situation. Okay, so there's some of the potential pitfalls, but as I say, there's some ways we can really easily overcome them, and our coaching skills are really, really helpful in doing that. Okay. We're going to take a little break now. Okay, we're going to have some breakout rooms, give you guys a chance to talk with each other rather than to listen to me for a few minutes. Now, as we go into breakout rooms, as I say, if anybody would prefer not to, or because of whatever's going on in the background for you, you can't go into a breakout room, that's absolutely fine. You can stay here in the main session. For those of you that are in the breakout rooms, I'm mindful we'll have some people who may be very experienced with psychometrics, very familiar with them, but we may also have some others who are quite new to the area. So a couple of questions that you might like to use to guide your conversation. Okay, for any of you who are particularly experienced and have used psychometrics in coaching, you might like to share a time where a coachee gained really good feedback or insight from a psychometric. And for those of you that may be newer to the area, is there a coaching relationship or context where you see potential and you might be really excited to try to use a psychometric there? Okay, just a couple of points that you might like to use to guide your conversation. If there's anything else burning, exciting that you really want to talk about instead, go for it. But these are here to guide people who might like that. So Julie's going to open up the breakout rooms now. We'll give you 7 minutes in the breakout rooms. There'll be 3 or 4 of you per room. And as I say, very, very welcome to stay in the main session if you'd rather do so instead. Okay, so I think we've got most people back now from the breakout rooms. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you had a good chat with your fellow colleagues and you took something and learned something from everybody there as well. Okay, we won't debrief those breakout rooms right now, but we'll crack on and we'll leave a little bit of time for conversation and questions at the end for anyone that would like it. Okay. So just as we start to wrap up, just what I want to look at is who can use psychometrics and what to look for in a psychometric. Okay, so if we were shown an MRI scan, okay, belonging to a colleague, unless we were trained doctors, we wouldn't expect to be able to interpret it accurately. Okay, to do so would be very, very risky. The patient will be acting on an amateur diagnosis and we could be doing an awful lot of damage. Okay, but the same applies when handling psychometrics. Even though it's not a matter of life or death, I appreciate that. But the interpretations and the implications can have really, really powerful effects for people, particularly for clients who might be feeling a little bit more vulnerable, might be a little bit more self-critical than others. So it's really, really important that we're making sure that we are using them effectively. Okay. So newsflash, you don't need to be a psychologist to use psychometrics, which is news to some people. Okay, psychology background can be helpful and the two complement each other, but you don't need to be a psychologist to use them. Okay, but you do need to undergo training. Okay. So many test publishers will require psychometric practitioners to undergo full training in their particular products. And this will be in line with professional guidance from the British Psychological Society on this. The BPS, the British Psychological Society, would be kind of the higher authority in our part of the world on this. Okay. So this training, and really a lot of what goes into this training, is to help mitigate some of those potential pitfalls and risks that we looked at earlier on. Okay, psychometric test using training is offered by lots of different organizations, but it always should be approved by the British Psychological Society. Okay, so there's two types of training you could be looking at. There's your general psychometric test training, okay, which is called TUA, TUP training. Okay, that stands for test user ability and test user personality. And as I say, should be accredited by the BPS, the British Psychological Society, or you'll see some as well that will be accredited by FPA, the European Federation of Psychologists Associations. Okay. So that's your general psychometric test training. As I say, a lot of test publishers as well will require you to undergo specific training in their specific tools. Okay, this would really be just to make sure that you're absolutely getting the most from the tool, that you're using it to the best of your ability, and that you're giving the best value for your clients around it. Okay. And then what to look for in a psychometric. Okay, maybe the most obvious point, and it might seem self-evident, but of course, first of all, you need to consider what it is that you want to measure. Okay, whether it's conflict management style, whether it's emotional intelligence, resilience, career beliefs, values, motivations. Okay, so it's important that we would choose our tool accordingly. So choose a tool that meets our clients' needs rather than just using a tool because we're familiar with it or because we have an accreditation in it. Okay. But once you've decided what it is you'd like to measure, a couple of things that are really important. One is that you're using an assessment from a reputable test publisher. Okay, there are lots of these. Again, we can share more details with you. Some of the bigger ones would be Psychological Consultancy, Podium, MHS, Multi Health Systems, Wellbeing Project. Some of the ones we work with. There's lots more in the States as well, but that you're using a recognized, reputable test publisher. Okay, that you're not Googling it, you're not pulling something off the internet that says it's a psychometric. Do your homework and to check that any assessments you're using are based solidly on academic research, okay, and scientific research. Okay. That the people who developed your assessments, maybe psychologists or psychometricians or statisticians who have experience in test design and statistical analysis and methods. And then you're also going to want to be looking for reliability, validity, and norms. Okay, some of you will be very familiar with these words. If anybody does some psychometric test training in the future, they'll be much more familiar with you. But essentially, these mean that you're looking for a test to be reliable. Okay, so that means that a test is consistent. So if I take a test, if I took a test yesterday, if I take it today, if I take it again tomorrow, that it's going to provide consistent results. Validity is that an assessment measures what it claims to measure. Okay, so that if you're saying this assessment measures somebody's motivations, that the questions within that assessment are aligned to that. Okay, lots of different forms of validity, but that's a high level one-liner on it. Okay, and it can be helpful if your assessment is normed or has norm groups. So when you're generating a report for your client, and a normed assessment means that you're able to compare your client's results to other people of a similar profile. Okay, so let's say if you're working with school students, okay, it wouldn't be fair that you compare a school student's results to a manager, a group of managers. Okay, you want to compare them to other school students. Similarly, if you're working with leaders, you might like to compare your client's results to another leadership group or a professional group, as opposed to a general population group. Okay, so very high level overview. There are some of the things that you're looking for in a psychometric assessment. Okay, some resources that might be helpful for you might like the BPS, the British Psychological Society, on their website, they have a really fantastic section that does a review of lots of different psychometric assessments. Okay, so any psychometrics that you're interested in, it's a great place to go and have a look at those reviews. And again, check whether they're approved by the BPS and supported by the BPS. For any of you that might be interested in psychometric test training, there's a link there to access our psychometric test training. Okay. And loads more. But as always, we'll keep the conversation going on the LinkedIn Dirty Salad Club page. You can get in touch with us at any time with any questions. But just some closing thoughts for the day. These are my closing thoughts for this morning. And if anybody might like to pop into the chat, their own. Okay. So coaching is the intervention. Psychometrics provide insight to facilitate that intervention. Okay, so we're not, as I say, we're not saying that psychometrics themselves are the intervention, but they're there to support and to facilitate our coaching relationship and our coaching conversations with our clients. A good coach can use psychometrics in a profound way. I think there's so many potential for coachable moments that come out of psychometrics. There's so much information there that can help us to create some really, really great questions for our clients. And any psychometric is only as good as the hands using it. Okay, so anybody using psychometrics, we have a real responsibility to ourselves and our own reputation, but of course to our clients, to make sure that we're using it effectively and ethically with our clients. Okay. Okay, anybody else? Anything in the chat there? Anybody, any closing thoughts or comments?
Hi, Tanya, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, it's Jenny Minogue here. I had a comment in the chat to Julie, but sure, I'll just say it out to the group. Like I did the BPS training a number of years ago, and it's absolutely true what you're saying, you know, it's the training in the how to ethically perform these, but I got such a sense on the course that some people, it was just kind of, they were missing that element of it, that they just wanted, okay, what's the score, and you know, that output, and it's just kind of a comment that I just see there's like a danger in this, that it's harmful to someone if their self-concept is one thing, and then this test that they think is, oh, it's scientifically derived, it's all that, without context and without proper feedback. If that comes out differently, you know, that can be harmful for that. And I just see it kind of creeping into recruitment a bit. And maybe just your thoughts on that, because I know there was like that documentary on Sky Atlantic or something a couple of weeks ago, and just terrifying what's happening kind of in the US. And do you see that kind of coming into Ireland, and what do you see the pros and cons?
Yeah, that's the HBO documentary we're talking about. I mean, that largely covered one particular assessment that will be quite well known among psychologists anyway, for having no scientific basis behind it whatsoever. But I think the danger with that documentary was that it kind of blanketed that there was an impression given that applied to all psychometrics out there, and it really isn't the case at all. I do see, and I saw your question in the chat, Jenny, I do see they're used an awful lot in recruitment, and I think they're going to be used more so because, for lots of different reasons, but a lot of them pandemic related. You know, people's candidate pool is growing.
Yeah.
Because geography is less of a limitation for people anymore. I think that's going to be a factor in causing them to be used more often. But also now people are looking for different things when recruiting, you know, how people are going to work remotely. Are they suited to remote work? Are they self-motivated? Are they self-disciplined? All of these type of things are coming into it, which is another reason I think that they'll be used more. And in your question, Jenny, in the chat, you were asking about pros and cons, and there are, but rather than pros and cons, I think similarly with coaching, it's really about making sure that they're used in that ethical way. And, you know, a lot of things like, you know, ensuring that they're only one source of information in a recruitment process. Like we would always say that no decision should be made solely on the basis of psychometric results. You know, they should be used in conjunction with whether it's interview, you know, assessment centers, all of the other parts of a recruitment process. So really important that they're only one source of information in a recruitment process. Really important that the candidate has access to those results and has an opportunity to receive feedback on them. Okay. This is all a little bit clearer now since the introduction of GDPR, in that any assessment results belong to that candidate. It's their data, and they have a right to see those results. But best practice, even have an opportunity to have feedback on them. Okay. But also what's really, I think, really helpful, it's not common practice, but that the results of any psychometrics used in recruitment are used then even afterwards in some way. So for anybody who's selected into the role, that those psychometrics could be used to inform, let's say, their onboarding process or their development into the role. Because there's gold there in some of that data, and it's just never used again. Like you said,
track if the characteristics you thought were right for the job actually end up producing the results that you expect.
But that couple of those, so it's not so much about pros and cons, but there are definitely some of those things, you know, we can do to really ensure that they're used ethically and effectively in recruitment. Yeah.
Great session, by the way. Thanks, Million.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay.
Tanya, hi, it's Connie Kelly. Just to add, I just have a comment to add to what you've said about the information contained within psychometrics, because increasingly I realize that the information is of educational use. It's personal, it's very deep, and depending on the ability of the coach to be able to, I suppose, convey that information in a way that's neutral, objective actually is the word. That really then I think you're serving both the individual who takes the assessment, and you're also serving the company for which they're working for or with as well, simply because what you're the potential to be able to just enhance a person's lifestyle or quality of life by delivering the information that's contained within those assessments. But all of that requires time, and it also requires a particular type of message from people who are actually within the field of coaching as well. Yeah. Particularly if we have to alleviate fear or thinking, if we have to alleviate any sort of concerns about the information that we are imparting as part of what we do.
Yeah. I really like that. Connie, you're really highlighting, I suppose, the importance of the sensitivity that we need to have as coaches around that. And, you know, I would think it's really important that we treat that, although a psychometric report is a piece of paper,
Absolutely.
you know, but we treat that piece of paper or those results with the same sensitivity and respect that we treat that anything that comes out of our clients' mouths, let's say any personal information that they share with us. Yeah.
Yes, and also the value that the value of the psychometric is that the information, you know, kind of at its best is 18 months, you know, that as part of the growth cycle, as part of the way that we grow and evolve from within our professional setting, as well as in the context of our lives, that it's only it's just a minute. It's not photogenic, but it's like a timestamp. Yeah. It's a timestamp that actually would have an end of use date, you know, kind of an 18 months on, you know, kind of we should have actually grown beyond that point. Yes. So it's a learning experience. And I think that's the value that I would love to be able to convey to anybody that I would be interested in working with, is that the value it's multiplied, I think, in terms of knowing why and how psychometrics are quite a valuable resource.
Yeah, absolutely. We can keep the conversation going. But do you just want to give time to say thank you very much for everybody? I'm conscious people might have other commitments at 11 o'clock. So thanks so much again to everybody for being with us. Julie has a couple of words just to say about Dirty Salad Club next month.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've popped the link in the chat there a few minutes ago just to mention that we are getting back together on the 11th of August. Paddy Moran is going to be hosting on the topic of trust. So how we can make it or break it. So that's going to be all about trust, psychological safety. These are just key areas we really need to focus on when it comes to retaining talent and looking after our teams, their well-being and that team cohesion. So really important topic that we are going to be talking about next month. So looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Plenty of you there as well.
Thank you, ladies. Okay.
Thanks, Julie, and goodbye to anybody that has to leave and has other commitments this morning. Thanks again for joining us. Julie will be sharing the recording and the slides from this morning's session on the Dirty Salad Club LinkedIn page. So for anyone who has to go, we can keep the conversation going there. Any questions? But if anyone would like to stay on to chat for a few more minutes, I'm available for another few minutes, certainly. Anyway.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Julie.
Okay, bye-bye.